The story of tanker Ion Lazarevich Degen, Junior Lieutenant, T-3485 Tank Commander. Awarded the Medal for Courage and the Order of the Patriotic War, 2nd degree. Fate pulled me from the firing squad at the last moment. I was born in 1925 in Mogilev Podolsky, a small town on the old state border. My father was already 62 years old at the time, while my mother was only 26. It was his second marriage. My father worked as a paramedic, a respected and experienced specialist whom even certified doctors consulted for advice. But in 1928, he passed away, leaving my mother and me alone. My mother worked as a nurse in a hospital. Life was tough, especially during the famine of 1933. From childhood, I knew what it meant to live half-starved, counting every piece of bread. At 12, I started working as an apprentice to a blacksmith, Uncle Fyodor. This man, with only 2 years of schooling, spoke several languages and treated me like a son. Under his care, I grew up, learned a trade, and gradually got used to a harsh life. Despite the poverty, I was fascinated by science. I studied zoology, botany, and literature, and had my own plots at the Young Naturalists Station, where I grew rubber-bearing plants. I was a fanatic devoted to the communist system, believing in its strength and justice. We teenagers spent a lot of time at the local border guard detachment. By 16, I could handle all types of small arms, including the DP machine gun, rode horses well, and knew how to use grenades. The 130th Rifle Division was stationed in our town, and this environment seemed to prepare me for the war to come. In the summer of 1941, I finished 9th grade and immediately got a job as a counselor at a pioneer camp near a railway bridge over the Dniester. On the night of June 22nd, while on duty at the camp, I saw a heavily loaded train pass over the bridge toward Germany. By morning, alarming rumors spread through the town. War had begun. That same day, our town was bombed for the first time. Policemen fired their revolvers at German planes, which looked almost absurd. I rushed to the Komsomol committee, then to the military enlistment office, begging to be accepted as a volunteer. I appealed to duty, spoke of Civil War heroes, of defending the motherland, repeating the slogans that filled me. But the response was always the same. Children aren't drafted into the army. It was agonizing to see the war so close and feel useless. But 10 days later, the Komsomol committee formed a volunteer extermination battalion from 9th and 10th grade students. I joined a platoon of 9th graders. There were 31 of us, almost all 17 years old except for 3, including me, born in 1925. Most of the platoon were Jews. 2 days later, we were issued uniforms and weapons. We received carbines, 100 rounds of ammunition each, and 4 grenades. Our platoon had a Maxim machine gun, which I quickly mastered, and I was appointed the first gunner. We had no Red Army booklets. My only document was my Komsomol card. My first combat experience came near Vapnyarka. The summer of 1941 became a time I'll never forget. We were thrown into the thick of events. Battles followed one after another. Even when we repelled German attacks, we still retreated. Our rifle companies were dwindling, not just from losses, but also from desertions. The skies belonged to the Germans. I saw 9 of our I-16 fighters shot down by 2 Messerschmitts in an unequal fight. 2 weeks after the war began, we stopped receiving food and ammunition supplies. The quartermaster and field kitchen vanished. A few soldiers from shattered units were added to our companies, but the commanders had fled. Soon I was chosen as the platoon commander, and even the personnel officers didn't object. My classmates were dying beside me. We buried 17-year-old boys, and I could barely hold back tears. In early August, we managed to set 2 German tanks on fire with grenades. But soon, our division was encircled between Uman and Kristinivka. That was the worst, feeling utterly helpless. Reservists abandoned their weapons and scattered to the villages. We, the remnants of the extermination battalion, decided to head east. We carried the severely wounded, but later, seeing their condition, left 2 with villagers who seemed trustworthy. I tried to learn their fate later, but found nothing. We attacked small German groups, sometimes engaging in hand-to-hand combat. In one such fight, I struck a German sergeant's helmet with my rifle butt. We took him prisoner, but he behaved arrogantly and shouted, "Verfluchte Jude," at us. I shot him. We had nowhere to keep a prisoner. We were barely surviving ourselves. I took his pistol as a trophy. We stubbornly fought our way to our lines, most of us using captured weapons, while I kept dragging the Maxim. By evening, only two of us remained, me and Sasha Seuferman. We fired until our ammunition ran out. I took a bullet in the leg and Sasha bandaged me. We hid the machine gun's bolt in a latrine pit and crawled on. For 19 days, Sasha and I moved at night, eating green apples and grain, dressing my festering wound with moss and ash. I leaned on his shoulder. Without him, I wouldn't have survived. When we reached the Dniester, we decided to swim across. We took off our boots, discarded our weapons, and swam silently. The water eased my pain, but the current pulled us. Halfway across, a cramp seized me, and I saved myself by stabbing my leg with a pin. When I looked back, Sasha was gone. I shouted his name, but the river was silent. He drowned. I reached the shore, exhausted and broken, and for the first time I wept, not from pain, but from despair, and the realization that everything we'd been through might be in vain. I hid from the Germans, then, exhausted, crawled to a village. There the Grigoryak family took me in, fed me, and bandaged my wounds. They risked their lives hiding a Jew, as the penalty was execution. With their help, I reached a hospital. Those people saved me, and I remembered them all my life. We escaped the encirclement at an unimaginable cost. When Sasha drowned in the Dniester, I was left alone, barely standing. My leg was festering, swollen, and wouldn't bend. I trudged on, leaning on a makeshift stick, no longer knowing where I was going. But I was lucky to stumble upon the Grigoryak family's home. These simple peasants undressed me, cleaned my wound, fed me hot meat with potatoes, and gave me bread. I still remember that taste, the taste of life snatched from hell. They knew I was a Jew, knew that hiding me meant execution, but they didn't hesitate for a moment. A few days later, they dressed me in civilian clothes and began passing me from village to village, like a relay, until I reached the front line. Peasant carts carried me onward, and one day I realized I was on territory held by our forces. Soon I was in a hospital in Poltava. There I learned that only 4 of our volunteer platoon had survived. All became disabled. Yakov Reutberg, my classmate, was severely wounded, but later became a mathematics professor. The most astonishing thing happened in June 1945, when I was discharged from the hospital. On the platform in Kyiv, I saw Sasha Seuferman, alive, though missing a leg. All this time, he thought I'd died in the Dniester, and I believed he'd drowned. We embraced, 2 crippled boys whom fate had torn apart and reunited after the war. That's when I realized life, even the most broken and cruel, still holds its miracles. After escaping the encirclement, I faced long months of treatment. Doctors in Poltava said my leg needed immediate amputation, but I refused. At 16, the prospect of becoming a cripple seemed worse than death. I feared they'd sedate me and cut off my leg without consent, so I traded food with a neighbor, wary of spiked meals. I survived, my bones healed, the wound closed, and eventually my leg held me again. I was sent further to the rear. I moved through hospitals in Saratov, Kuybyshev, and the Chelyabinsk region. Everywhere, as a teenage frontline casualty, I was treated with respect. On November 7, 1941, the holiday, the wounded were given 100 grams of vodka. It was my first taste, and I found it revolting. Only on January 21st, 1942, was I finally discharged from the hospital and told to await conscription. I endured freezing cold and wandered until I met an old acquaintance, border guard Alexander Gagwa, who helped me reach his native village of Shroma in Georgia. There I was welcomed like family, fed, treated, and supported. That's when I truly fell in love with Georgia and its people. Months passed, and in June 1942, I was back at war. I joined a division of armored trains. This marked a new chapter in my frontline life. Fierce battles in the Caucasus, reconnaissance, combat, and trials no less grueling than in 1941. In Georgia, I served in the reconnaissance unit of the Armored Train Division. It was a unique unit, just 12 fighters armed with submachine guns, grenades, and captured pistols. We could do everything: direct fire for armored platforms, tap into communication lines, work as switchmen and machinists, implant or defuse mines on railways. We weren't sent to capture prisoners. Our tasks were deeper and more dangerous. Sneaking into enemy rear, observing, relaying coordinates, and, if needed, holding back breakthroughs. I was among men who seemed like true giants to me. Stepan Lagutin, a 2-meter-tall Altai hunter who could drink 2 liters of vodka and stay sober, stood out especially. He became almost like a father to me. I was proud to fight alongside these men. In July 1942, near Armavir, our reconnaissance commander was killed, and I was appointed in his place. My literacy and map-reading skills came in handy. German tanks advanced in waves, and frames in the sky constantly directed dive-bombing Junkers. Our armored trains lost men and were bombed, but we held on. The worst trial came in the Caucasus passes. We were sent to a height of 3,000 meters with orders to hold. The Germans from the Edelweiss division pounded us with mortars, while we returned only sniper fire. Food ran out, and I chewed on a tank helmet strap to keep from going mad with hunger. But we held. Then a German company led by a captain surrendered to us. They too had run out of food. It was a rare sight. Proud soldiers driven to desperation by hunger. For the battles in the pass, I received the Medal for Courage, but I only got to enjoy it for 2 days. In Beslan, where the division was sent for reorganization, I fell into the hands of the Special Department. Suspected of profiteering in a fight with a party official, Lagutin and I were thrown into a death row cellar. The stench, filth, and 20 men awaiting execution. We heard the volleys, the screams of those led away. I remember every second of that horror, thinking tomorrow would be my turn. But miraculously, the Special Department officers from our division pulled us out. A few days later, I was seriously wounded in reconnaissance. I killed a German with a knife for the first time and vomited right there in enemy territory. We were crossing a river under fire when a bullet found me again. Lagutin saved my life, pulling me out from under fire. His fate after the hospital remained a mystery to me. In the Caucasus, I endured everything: fear, hunger, despair, and the death of comrades. It was the war's darkest period. At the end of 1942, after the hospital, I was sent not to the front but to a training tank regiment. This was unexpected and hard to accept. The regiment was in a remote Georgian village called Shulaveri, a harsh survival school. Tanks of all types, hastily assembled crews, and constant hunger. We were barely fed, given only a gruel of moldy corn. People walked exhausted, sustained only by the desire to return to the front. A few days later, an order came to send some fighters to a military school. I didn't want to go, but I was sharply told that orders aren't discussed. They gathered 150 of us, mostly frontline veterans, issued dry rations, and sent us across the Caspian Sea. The journey was grueling. 4,000 men on one ship, cold, damp, seasickness. On the way, we even broke into barrels of port wine to warm up. NKVD officers awaited us on shore, but didn't dare confront the hungry, angry tankers. That's how I ended up at the 1st Kharkov Tank School in Churchik. Training lasted 13 months. It was all there. Drill, strict discipline, classes on old BT tanks and new T-34s. We studied tactics, driving, and weapons. The cadets were divided into frontliners and civilians. And though we were respected, the drill spared no one. Food was scarce, but better than in the regiment. Pilaf cooked in machine oil became the main dish. In our free time, we stole grapes and melons from local gardens. Classes were held in the field under scorching sun, our tunics turning into maps of white salt stains. We got a flask of water in the morning, and in the evening, they checked if anyone had drunk too much. I remember the instructors: Technical Lieutenant Koval, Colonel Kuzmichev. I remember my comrades, my close friend Misha Strebkov, Volodya Vovk, Sasha Goloborodko. I also remember the scoundrel Gradilenko, the company sergeant major who hated intellectuals and tormented Rostislav Armashov. Even in the school, we had to fight not only exhaustion and hunger, but also human baseness. In spring 1944, we passed our final exams, and I received the rank of junior lieutenant with honors. I was once again closer to the front, this time as a tank commander. After graduation, we were sent to Nizhny Tagil. There at the factory, I awaited my first combat tank. We lived right by the assembly line and helped build the machines. Women and teenagers worked with such dedication that it seemed every bolt was tightened with thoughts of the front. 10 days later, I was given a T-34-85 tank, a watch, a knife, and orders to form a crew. My first crew consisted of 4 guys, none of whom had seen combat. Gunner Vasya Karin died in the first battles. Gun Commander Vasya Osipov, a kind and reliable Ural native, was wounded and transferred to another battalion, and I never learned if he survived the war. Driver-mechanic Boris Makarov was wounded with us in early skirmishes, but returned and became my steadfast comrade until the end. The last was Sasha Balov, a Kuban Cossack who'd lived through occupation. He burned to death in a tank. The crew was inexperienced and physically drained. The driver had only 8 hours behind the controls. The gunner was frail, and I worried how he'd handle 15-kilogram shells in the cramped fighting compartment. Only Osipov could shoot confidently. I knew that if I didn't feed these guys, they wouldn't survive the front. One day I saw an empty fuel tank on a platform. We hid it, filled it with diesel, and called it kerosene. All the way to the front, we traded it for food, milk, cottage cheese, bread, sour cream. Thanks to that, the crew came to life, and the guys found an interest in living. The train carrying our 30 tanks and 2 locomotives traveled for 4 days. We trained on the move. The driver logged hours, the gunner practiced loading shells faster, and I drilled them in tactics. When the train reached Smolensk and we were sent to Bogushevsk under our own power, I started to believe in these guys. We went through a trial by fire, and I knew they were no longer just a random crew but my combat family. Our train arrived at the 2nd Guards Separate Tank Brigade, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Yefim Yevseyevich Dukovny. This brigade was unique, directly subordinate to the front and used solely for breaking through defenses. Each breakthrough came at enormous cost. People said it was a brigade of doomed men. Surviving 2 offensives was a miracle. Surviving 3 made you a lucky one. That's what they started calling me. The brigade had 65 tanks, 3 battalions, a motorized rifle battalion, artillery, reconnaissance, a medical platoon, and many small units. But the most important thing was the fighting spirit. We knew we were sent where it was toughest, and not everyone came back alive. My battalion was commanded by Major Dorish, a calm, composed man whom everyone trusted. His tank was a reserve. He rarely went into battle himself, but his presence inspired confidence. The political officer, Smirnov, was despised by all, a marauder decked in medals who never showed up in combat. He was called, both behind his back and to his face, simply and clearly, scum. He lived off looting and others' fear, and I'd recall his name with bitterness more than once. The battalion's chief of staff was a different kind of man, conscientious, trying to spare us when reassigning horseless tankers to new machines. The battalion's structure was simple: 2 companies of 10 tanks each, plus the commander's 21st tank. Over 100 men in the crews, plus about 30 in support units. The briefing for new recruits was short and harsh. We were told 2 phrases: "The war will teach you," and "do as I do." For the rest, we relied on our own experience. No one was spared in the brigade, and every day could be your last. I looked at my crew and understood that their fate depended not only on their skills, but also on my ability to lead them in battle. Our first major battle with the brigade was during the Belarusian operation, a breakthrough between Vitebsk and Orsha, advancing through burned villages and ashes. But soon everything stalled. The rear fell behind at the Berezina, and we had no fuel or ammunition. When the brigade was ordered to move on Vilnius, we had only scraps of fuel and shells, enough for 3 tanks. I was entrusted with commanding this small platoon, so 3 tanks represented the entire Guards Brigade. We covered over 200 kilometers on dirt roads and tracks, exhausting both men and machines. That evening, we stopped at the headquarters of a rifle corps in a Lithuanian manner. The commander, Lieutenant General Krylov, looked at me and chuckled. "And this is the famous 2nd Guards that's supposed to take the city?" We stayed silent. He told us to rest and wait for morning. The next day, we were attached to a rifle division. The regimental commander, a lieutenant colonel, grandly declared that the enemy had only 100 infantry, a couple of tanks, and a few guns. A piece of cake. We moved forward, and it immediately became clear he'd lied. German guns fired from all sides, and a hit took out our track right away. We barely dragged the damaged tank into a garden, leaving the crew to hold the defense. I found the 2nd tank lifeless by a house wall, its crew inside. I ordered them to join the damaged tank and wait for repairs. The third tank, led by my friend Ivan Solovyov, was supporting a neighboring battalion, but burned the next day with its crew. We buried him right on a Vilnius street, under rubble, amidst ruins. Street fighting raged in the city. Infantry was supported by Poles with red and white armbands and a Jewish partisan detachment with red ribbons on their sleeves. We fought side by side. The Germans held on fiercely. Every street became a fortress. We had few shells left, and I thought 1,000 times before firing the cannon. More often, we used machine guns and tracks. For 3 days, my tank didn't leave combat. We lost track of time and space, living in smoke and fire. Vilnius's streets became hell. Collapsing buildings, bodies on the pavement, screams of the wounded, commanders' curses, orders of, "Forward or I'll shoot." The battalion we were attached to was gone by the second day. Clerks, cooks, signalmen, and drivers were sent in as replacements. These men, in the end, took Vilnius. I remember July 12th. We destroyed a German anti-aircraft gun, and a shell only grazed my tank's turret. Germans climbed onto the armor, trying to open the hatch. I held it shut with a strap while the crew maneuvered. We raced through the city until we reached a familiar church, our landmark. We survived by a miracle. Those battles stayed with me forever. They took my friends, my youth, but forged my will. Vilnius became a symbol that a person can endure more than they can imagine. After the battles for Vilnius, the war went on, and I kept fighting, losing crews and gaining new comrades. Each battle took those who'd sat beside me in the cramped turret just yesterday. I saw tanks burn, crews perish inside, yet I kept moving forward because there was no other way. My brigade lived in constant tension. We were thrown into breakthroughs, lost half our strength, got new men, and went back into battle. This continued until the war's end. I often thought of those left on the battlefields. There were too many. After victory, I tried to find the families who'd saved me in those dark years. In the summer of 1949, I went to the village where the Grigoriaks lived, the people who hid me after crossing the Dniester. But I found only ruins and weeds. No one was left. That's when I understood that the duty of memory is the most sacred thing I have. I met classmates, the few who survived. All were broken by the war. Some became disabled, others lost their health forever. I also saw Sasha Seuferman, the comrade I'd escaped encirclement with in 1941, whom I thought had drowned in the Dniester. He'd lost a leg at Stalingrad but was alive. Seeing him was a miracle. I often thought about what I experienced as a 16-year-old, killing an enemy for the first time. Back then, I felt joy, exhilaration. The war made me grow up too soon, taught me to kill calmly, without pity or hesitation. But the memory of each moment lives on. The most terrifying time for me was the retreat in the Caucasus. That's where I first felt despair, that everything was collapsing, that the front was crumbling, that there was no hope. Yet even then, I held on. Years passed. I became a doctor, a writer, a man who lived a long life. But wherever I was, whatever I did, what remained with me were the faces of fallen friends, the smoke of burning tanks, and an eternal sense of duty to those who didn't return. I'm alive only because their sacrifices let me survive. When I look back, I realize my entire life is gratitude for every day given to me at the cost of others' lives.